There's something deeply powerful about silence, not the silence that comes from fear or retreat, but the kind that arises from knowing your worth. It's the kind of silence that holds a room not because it demands attention, but because it commands respect. Most of us grow up thinking we need to explain ourselves, defend our choices, or fill every quiet space with justification. But healing begins the moment we realize we don't owe our voice to anyone who hasn't earned the right to hear it. Silence is not weakness. It's the language of strength wrapped in self-trust. It tells the world, I know who I am and I don't need to prove it to you. When we stay silent, we give ourselves room to listen, not just to others, but to our inner truth. We notice who talks over us and who leans in with curiosity. We see who values presence over performance. We stop wasting words on people who only listen to reply, not to understand. Silence lets us conserve our energy and use our voice only when it matters, and that makes it all the more powerful when we do speak. The moment we stop begging to be seen and heard, we start becoming undeniable. Respect doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from knowing when not to say a word. There's something undeniably magnetic about a person who doesn't immediately reveal everything about themselves. In a world obsessed with constant updates, instant opinions, and oversharing every detail of our lives, choosing to stay silent becomes a radical act of self-possession. When you don't rush to explain yourself, defend your perspective, or fill awkward gaps in conversation with nervous chatter, people begin to lean in. They begin to notice. They begin to wonder. Silence, in this sense, creates space for people to approach you with curiosity instead of assumptions. It creates an aura of mystery, not because you're being fake or manipulative, but because you're grounded enough to know that your story is sacred and doesn't need to be placed in everyone's hands. We've been taught to believe that vulnerability means telling all, that connection requires complete exposure. But real respect often begins with restraint. When you speak less about your pain, your dreams, or your worth, you're not hiding, you're honoring. You're choosing to share yourself selectively with intention. And that's where respect begins, with boundaries. People are drawn to what they don't fully understand. They lean into presence more than performance. And when you're silent, truly silent, people are left to notice your energy, your values, your confidence. They begin to see you not as someone they can figure out and file away, but as someone they must slowly earn access to. In your silence, you become unforgettable, not because you're loud, but because you're rare. There's a kind of peace that comes with realizing you don't have to respond to everything that offends you, confuses you, or hurts you. We live in a world that constantly invites us into conflict. Comments to clap back at, messages to defend, people to prove wrong. But when you learn to stay silent in the face of provocation, you reclaim your power. Not every argument deserves your energy. Not every disagreement needs your perspective. Some people don't want to understand you. They want a reaction they can use to justify their behavior. And when you refuse to give it to them, you strip away their power without saying a word. Staying silent doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to choose your battles. It means you've grown tired of wasting emotional currency on people who aren't interested in growth. There's wisdom in realizing that peace is more valuable than being right. That sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you've already made peace with yourself. You don't need to raise your voice when your silence communicates something louder. I don't owe you my disruption just to soothe your ego. When you stop showing up to every conflict, you start rising above the chaos. And that's when people begin to respect you, not because you fought them, but because you chose yourself. Every time you let something slide, every time you explain away someone's disrespect, you're teaching them something. Not just about you, but about what's acceptable in your presence. People learn from your boundaries or your lack of them. And often we stay silent not from strength, but from fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being abandoned. But the truth is, the longer you stay silent about what hurts, the louder the disrespect becomes. When you keep tolerating what you don't deserve, you start shrinking yourself to make others more comfortable. You become the person who's easy to walk over, not because you're not worthy, but because you've forgotten to honor that worth out loud. But there's another kind of silence, the powerful kind. It's the silence that follows a raised boundary, the silence that walks away instead of begging someone to change. When you begin to hold your silence not as submission, but as self-respect, people notice. You're no longer explaining your pain to those who cause it. You're no longer staying in rooms where your presence isn't valued. That kind of silence teaches people fast. It tells them, if you want access to me, you have to rise to meet me. And if they don't, your silence makes it clear. They won't get the chance again. This kind of silent strength doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't scream or plead. It simply withdraws, detaches, and protects. You start drawing invisible lines that say, I'm not available for this version of you. And over time, those who truly respect you will adjust. Those who don't will fall away. Either way, you win, because you've stopped tolerating the behavior that once taught them to treat you like less. There's a quiet truth that reveals itself when you stop speaking just to be heard. Not everyone who hears you is truly listening. When you fall silent, intentionally and without apology, you begin to see the room more clearly. You notice who rushes to fill the silence with their own voice and who waits with patience. You notice who is uncomfortable without noise, and who is comfortable with you even in stillness. Silence becomes a mirror. It reflects back the quality of connection you have with those around you. Are they here to understand you, or just to react to you? We often think speaking more will make people care more, but the opposite is often true. Constantly explaining yourself, over-communicating your needs, or trying to be understood by everyone can actually blur your value. But when you choose silence, when you pause, hold back, and simply watch, you shift the dynamic. You stop working so hard to be seen and give others the opportunity to meet you halfway. And that's when you see who's paying attention not to your words, but to your presence. That's when you discover the difference between someone who listens out of love and someone who listens out of obligation. Silence sharpens your awareness. You start picking up on tone, on timing, on energy. You begin to hear what isn't being said, and you begin to notice how people show up when you're no longer performing. And in that stillness, the truth becomes unavoidable. The people who truly care don't need you to speak for them to stay. They stay because your silence still speaks to them. Because respect isn't always shown in applause. It's often found in the way people hold space for your quiet. There comes a moment when you no longer feel the need to explain your choices, your boundaries, or your emotions. And that moment is when silence becomes sacred. Silence, in its purest form, is not the absence of words, but the presence of self. It's the calm that rises when you stop outsourcing your worth to the reactions of others. When you choose to stay silent, not because you're scared, but because you're secure, that's when silence becomes a declaration of self-respect. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need to perform it for you. So many of us have been conditioned to believe that we have to speak up to prove we're strong. We've been taught to believe that silence equals weakness, or worse, invisibility. But true strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it lowers it. Sometimes it says nothing at all, because it knows that not everyone deserves access to your story. Not everyone earns the right to your vulnerability. And when you withhold your words from those who misuse them, you protect something sacred, your peace. You begin to realize that not every situation requires your input. Not every person deserves your response. Not every emotion needs to be announced. Self-respect teaches you to pause, to reflect, to ask, is this worth my voice? And if the answer is no, you let your silence speak on your behalf. You walk away from conversations that cost you your dignity. You disengage from chaos that doesn't serve your growth, and you stop justifying your boundaries to people who benefit from your exhaustion. In doing so, you teach the world that your silence is not emptiness. It's evidence that you finally value yourself enough not to beg for understanding. There is a quiet authority that comes with choosing your words carefully. When you're constantly talking, constantly explaining, constantly reacting, your voice becomes background noise, easily ignored, easily dismissed. But when you learn to sit in silence and speak only when something truly needs to be said, your words start to carry a different kind of gravity. People lean in when you talk, not because you're louder than everyone else, but because you've taught them that when you speak, it matters. That your voice is not for convenience or approval, it's for truth. This isn't about manipulation. It's not about withholding to seem powerful. It's about learning to value your voice enough not to waste it. You stop offering endless explanations to people who have already made up their minds. You stop trying to be palatable or agreeable. You realize that you don't have to fill every silence to stay connected. Real connection doesn't come from constant communication. It comes from intentional communication. And when you speak from that place of clarity, restraint, and self-trust, people feel it. They don't just hear your words, they absorb them. Your silence becomes the canvas on which your words are painted, and that contrast is powerful. It makes people pause, it makes them reflect, it makes them think twice before brushing off what you said. When you speak less, you leave room for others to sit with what you've said instead of rushing to respond. You give your message space to breathe. You give it time to land, and in that space, respect grows. Not just for your voice, but for the discernment behind it. There's a quiet kind of safety in saying less. The more you speak, especially in emotionally charged moments, the more raw material you give others to twist, to question, to use against you. Not everyone listens with compassion. Some listen to gather leverage, some don't hear your words. They hear their own insecurities echoed in your silence, and they turn your vulnerability into a weapon. But when you choose silence, you take the air out of their projection. You give them nothing to distort, nothing to manipulate, nothing to feed their narrative, and that's powerful. Silence doesn't mean you don't feel. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've chosen to place your peace above the need to be understood by people who aren't willing to listen with empathy. There's wisdom in that choice. Because when you hold back your truth from those who have shown they can't carry it with care, you protect your dignity. You stop allowing people to write your story with their assumptions. You let them sit in their discomfort, in their confusion, in their own noise, while you protect the quiet clarity inside you. And in that stillness, something unexpected happens. People begin to show their true colors. When they can't provoke you, when they can't control the conversation, when they can't pull a reaction from you, they're left to confront their own reflection. Your silence becomes a mirror, and those who are capable of respect will meet it with grace. Those who aren't will reveal themselves. Either way, you win, because you've chosen not to hand them the script. You've chosen not to make yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable. You've chosen to let silence do the talking, and sometimes that speaks louder than anything you could say. There's a different energy that surrounds a person who's made peace with their inner world. When you're no longer reacting to every opinion, every judgment, every shifting circumstance, you begin to walk differently. You carry yourself with a calm strength that others can feel even before you speak. This kind of stillness doesn't come from pretending to be unbothered. It comes from doing the deeper work of learning to sit with your discomfort, your insecurities, your truth, without needing to fix it for someone else's approval. And once you reach that space within yourself, silence becomes less of a defense mechanism and more of a home. Inner stillness softens your presence while deepening your power. You stop rushing to prove your worth or defend your value. You're no longer grasping for validation because you've already validated yourself. You no longer speak just to fill the emptiness because you've learned that presence isn't about performance. It's about alignment. When your heart and your mind are in sync, when your peace becomes your priority, you start radiating a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to dominate the room to be felt. And the world responds to that energy. People respect those who don't flinch at silence, who can hold space without anxiety, who can stand in the middle of tension without crumbling. Stillness makes you magnetic, not because you're trying to impress, but because you're anchored in yourself. It teaches others that your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee, that your attention is intentional, not available to everyone. And that's when respect arrives, not through demand, but through your quiet decision to honor your own depth. In a world that constantly demands more from us, silence offers a profound form of self-respect and strength. When you choose to stay silent, not out of fear or avoidance, but from a place of deep inner knowing, you allow your presence to speak for itself. Silence becomes more than the absence of noise. It becomes a powerful statement. It teaches others how to treat you, how to listen to you, and how to value you. It protects your peace and offers you the space to observe, to reflect, and to discern the relationships and situations that truly deserve your energy. Through silence, you show the world that your worth isn't up for negotiation. You give less of yourself to those who don't appreciate it, and more to those who truly see and respect you. And in that quiet strength, you find that the respect you've been seeking isn't something that can be demanded. It's something that naturally follows when you begin to honor your own voice, your own space, and your own truth. So embrace the power of silence. Let your words be fewer but more meaningful. Let your stillness become a beacon of your inner strength, and watch how the world begins to treat you differently. In that silence, you will find the respect you deserve.